I first met Dr. Luke online several years ago and was blown away by his passionate presentation about autism and anxiety for the National Autistic Society. By the way, Nina Griffiths has done a wonderful graphic about this. Following the NAS conference, I started reading as much as I could that Luke has written about autism and neurodivergence, including the book behind me. With more than 30 years working in the autism field, teaching at Sheffield Hallam University, advocating on behalf of autistic individuals, publishing numerous papers and books, and winning multiple autism-related awards, Luke strikes me as someone that demands our attention and our consideration. Dr. Luke Beardon, over to you.
Oh God, listening to that, I kind of wanted to listen to myself. I was like, oh, who is this guy? I want to meet him. Oh dear, difficult one. Okay, so I wasn't going to start off by saying I never know how to start and I never know how to finish either, really. One of the things that I would suggest, by the way, this is all, it's not all opinion, not all just my opinion. A lot of it is based on research as well. But this is opinion, but I'm fairly confident that I'm right. You can disagree with me if you want to, but I don't think neurodivergent people are very good at looking after themselves, and I don't think neurodivergent people are very good at being kind to themselves. And I think I don't want to sound patronizing, but I think it's so important that the concept of kindness and self-kindness is taken on board. So during this talk, please be kind to yourself. If you need to opt out, if I'm talking about things that aren't very pleasant to hear, because we've got to be honest about these things, then just take some time for yourself. As Gail said, this is being recorded, so you can always come back. But I do think, I do wonder, for me, one of the most incredible things to learn, and it's a huge thing to learn, it sounds so simple, is that actually being kind to other people, which so many neurodivergent people hyper empathizing and be a parent, like Joe was saying, being a warrior, being an advocate, all of those sorts of things. I'm of the opinion that autistic people and other neurodivergent people make brilliant advocates for other people and terrible advocates for themselves. And actually, and part of that is lacking that kindness and also lacking that genuine belief that that they should be allowed to self-advocate and all of those sorts of things. I'll come back to that a bit later on, but actually learning that being kind to yourself is part of advocating for other people and being kind to other people. It's part of the same process. If you're not kind to yourself, if you're not in a good headspace, you won't be as good at advocating for other people. It's an amazing lesson to learn. All of a sudden you have that ability to allow yourself kindness in order to then share it with other people. Anyway, I don't know why I started with that, but there you go. I'm always I'm always in two minds as to whether to leave the chat open or to close it down. I'm not too bad at multitasking, but if somebody asks a really exciting question, I'll forget about my presentation and then I'll just crack on with. So I don't know. I know David very kindly is going to collate some questions, so maybe I ought to. Oh, I don't know. If you do ask me a direct question on the chat and I ignore it, then maybe I'll revisit that afterwards. Yeah, maybe I ought to close it down because otherwise I'll just get distracted by that. But if anybody does desperately need me to stop and if you want to put your hand up or whatever, I'm sure one of the moderators will let me know. Okay, so I came up with this concept. So, like I've put here a concept generated by Dr. Luke Beardon, just to make it clear that I have this. If you Google it, it probably doesn't exist. But the whole concept of neurodivergent epistemology, like where does perceived knowledge actually come from? Like, and I say I'm very, very clear in terms of using the word perceived, because certainly from an autism perspective, and my area of interest is autism. I will not say my area of expertise. I don't think anybody is an expert on autism or whatever. You can have expertise in an area, but it doesn't make you an overall expert. So I might have some level of expertise in some aspects of some areas of autism, but I'm definitely not an expert. But I think in terms of epistemology, I'm very, very much of the opinion that certainly within the autism field, and I would be, pretty confident to suggest this goes into the wider neurodivergent field as well, that an enormous amount of of perceived knowledge is ill-informed, misinformed, sometimes diametrically opposite to the actual truth of what the lived experience actually is. And that to me is unbelievably scary, because if we, by we I mean not the people in this virtual room, but society, are basing our practices on that misinformation, then we will almost by definition be getting it wrong. And I think that is currently what's happening. And that's why I'm absolutely, Joe will tell you, having done my course, obsessed with saying, right, we need to start off by demystifying the myths, by saying, look, what you are purported to believe, what you are purported to suggest, this is what autism is, or this is what ADHD, or whatever it might be. This is how people live. This is, hang on a minute, how accurate is that? Can we break that down? Just to give, I can't even remember what I've put in terms of my presentation, but so okay, yeah, I'll come back to that. Just in terms of autism, like autism theory, if we just do a very, very, very quick synopsis, I'm not going to give you a synopsis of autism theory, but a synopsis of a critique of autism theory. So back in 2007, Rogenden and Mitchell wrote a fantastic paper going, okay, well, what does theory mean? What makes good theory? And I've done some work on also what makes good theory, and Dr. Nick Chown's done some good stuff around what makes good autism theory. But Rogenden and Mitchell said, right, well, good autism theory should, I mean, I like things in sets of three. So the fact they came out with three criteria is great. They said, good autism theory should be able to tick the boxes against specificity, uniqueness, and universality. In other words, the theory should be able to explain the phenomenon. It should be unique to autistic people, and it shouldn't be shared by other populations. No autism theory in terms of modern day mainstream theory, none of them meet any of the criteria. So if we're going to believe in that set of criteria, and I think they're reasonably robust, then and it's very easy to prove that none of the main theories meet those criteria, like not a single criterion. So if we believe on the one hand that they're a good set of criteria, and then we recognize that no single theory actually meets them, why are we basing autism knowledge on those theories? Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The diagnostic criteria, I think it's relatively easy to look at the diagnostic criteria, both in the DSM and in the ICD, and recognize the links between how we as a society are defining the criteria for clinicians to diagnose, which is a horrible word, but I'll come back to that, autism and ADHD, and autism certainly within the context of this discussion. And it's very easy to see where the links are with that flawed autism theory. So literally, the very building blocks upon which we understand things like autism are flawed, like the actual building blocks. We need to break it down completely and start all over again. And if any of you are more interested, come on my course. I could talk about, but that isn't the nature of this particular talk. So I ought to keep on track. But feel free, obviously, to ask questions later on. So where are we now? So this is just like, so I've put there all mainstream theories around neurodivergence and very medical model deficit based, and nobody seems too worried about it. So the concept of neuroaffirmative is so embryonic, and I'm sure, again, well, I'm not sure, but I'm assuming not specifically in this virtual room, but elsewhere. So going back, sorry to spotlight you, Joe, but like that example you gave before the recording started. So I apologize to anybody who loves this phrase. If you've met one individual with autism, you've met one individual, like, it's fantastic, like absolutely of its time, like Dr. Stephen Shaw, of its time, absolutely brilliant. I'll just share a little quick story. I was doing a keynote in Cork, and I mentioned this. It's the first time I'd ever mentioned it, because I was sort of musing over it and being at an autism conference, and I was getting really stressed. I was like sometimes when you speak at conferences, it's almost like a debrief. It's like, oh, this is my therapy for the next hour. I could just go, this is everything's wrong with the world, and I can go away. Oh, that was nice. Anyway, so I said, look, you can't go to an autism conference these days without somebody coming out with that quotation, and everybody or most people going, yay. So it's a quotation that people come out with at autism conferences. Oh God, I haven't listened to, I don't know if anybody's already said this. Oh God,
Several people, Luke, several people.
Oh, Okay.
Don't worry, carry on. We're all
Um,
listening. We're all
look,
listening.
look, look. I cannot offend you if you've said this because I didn't know that you'd done it. And please just like I'm probably in the wrong anyway, and you're probably anyway. My point being, people come out with it and they people say it as good practice, and it is genuinely like it's amazing of its time. Why is it like if you put that to one side, right, and say and apply it to a different minority group, and I don't want to offend anybody, but just imagine for yourself. So say for example, I'm referring somebody to you as, oh, this is a person well, I'll use me as an example. I'm mixed race, so you can play guess the mixed race game if you like, and I doubt many of you will get it. But anyway, so I'll refer myself and say, but can I just remind you, even though I am mixed race, I am an individual in my own right. You'd be horrified. You'd be like, that's just basically racist. That's ridiculous. That's an awful thing to say. Why in this day and age do we feel the need to remind ourselves autistic people are individual human beings? Like, and then we see that as good practice. Like, it scares me that we are so far behind in terms of our understanding of autism that it is still seen as good practice. It gives me goosebumps. I'm like, how can that be? Like, how is that still legitimate? Like, genuinely, the idea that just because you happen to be autistic, that somehow makes you the same as everybody else is so far removed from reality. Why do we have to keep? And then we've got things like Autism Awareness Day or week or why do we need to be aware of a whole group of individuals? We know they're around. Like this awareness, it's just, and I'm not saying that these are bad things or we shouldn't be celebrating the knowledge transfer and all of those sorts of things. But come on, the term diagnosis I have massive issues with. I love language. Like I genuinely do. I arrived at somebody's house, this amazing young person that I was doing a load of work with, and I was really annoyed. Like I'd driven through Sheffield, and I don't know if any of you are from Sheffield. Anyway, in Sheffield it may be the same elsewhere. I don't know. There's one particular supplier of skips. And you can't drive through Sheffield without seeing this particular thing of skips. And there's never an apostrophe on the side of the skips. It's got the person's name, so and so skips, and there's no apostrophe. And I was so annoyed. I was like, I couldn't think straight. I turned up. I was like, look, before I get into like what we're going to talk about, I'm just going to. And honestly, they were giggling away. They said, one day I'm going to write a biography of you, and I'm going to call it "Apostrophes Have Feelings Too." And I think that's a gorgeous idea for a biography of somebody. Language does have meaning and it's incredibly important. Why are we talking about diagnosis with the very clear connotations of you need fixing? That's what, if you look it up, and I've done it, I mean, there are different varieties of diagnosis, but the main purpose of, or the main etymology of the term diagnosis, the word diagnosis, is to seek something that requires fixing. That's what we're saying when we make a self-referral for a diagnosis. If you go on, I won't mention particular websites, you can find them for yourself. If you just type, how do I refer my child for an autism assessment or myself, it will say straight away, most authorities require a GP referral. Why do we go to GPs? Like, it's a rhetorical question. I'll answer it for you. We go to the GP to find out what's wrong with us and to get it fixed. So again, it's that subliminal message, this gatekeeping around. And by the way, I know I'm on record, but and this is just my opinion, so don't complain about me. I don't understand why you need a GP referral. Like, what's wrong with self-referral? Like, just get rid of that gatekeeping overnight. The number, and this is absolutely true. And I know because people are kind enough to share their stories with me, and not a week goes by. That's a guess, but very frequently people will say, "Oh, I've been told I can't be autistic." I went to the GP and they said, "Well, you've got a perfectly good job and you're a woman, so therefore you can't meet the threshold for autism." And this absolute nonsensical understanding of a human being is shameful. Anyway, I'm not saying GPs are bad by any stretch of the imagination, but why do we have to go anyway? But even the idea that you have to go through that medical model gatekeeping, that straight away gives you that kind of maybe subliminal, maybe less subliminal idea that actually what you're seeking for you or your child or your loved one or your partner or whatever is they are somehow fixable. And by fixable, it means they're somehow in the wrong in the first instance by being neurodivergent. That's horrific. And I'm going to come on to, I can't remember which slide it is, but I'll come on to microaggressions and why language is so important. And I think even just that, like a lot of people don't think about it. I refuse to use the term diagnosis. I much prefer identification or discovery or, whatever these gorgeous terms about understanding who you are as a human being. That's brilliant. I'm very pro identification. I'm not pro in terms of the process. I'm very pro self-identification as well, by the way. All these people go, oh, if we allowed autistic people to decide that they were autistic, everybody would be saying, would they? Really? We suddenly could have loads of people who are not neurodivergent going, oh, I think I want to be autistic. So absolutely, I don't think that's very true at all. Anyway, then we've got, by the way, you're not even allowed to be autistic, are you? You have clinically, you have to have an autistic spectrum disorder. So you have to be a disordered human being in order to be autistic. How disgraceful is that? And you have to go through an assessment process to identify just how rubbish you are as a human being. And if you don't believe me, look it up. Well, I wouldn't advocate you looking it up because it's highly depressing. But you have to have persistent deficits, for example. You have basically, it's not, it doesn't take much scratching beneath the surface to identify in terms of the autism field that to be autistic, you have to be a lesser human being compared to some wonderful norm. That's essentially what the DSM is saying. You have to be rubbish compared to somebody else, and you have to be quite significantly rubbish compared to somebody else. That's just like, what message are we giving to an entire population of human beings who are part of a natural variation of neurodiversity? And it is as simple as that. You have recorded this. Just clip that bit. You don't have to cite me or anything. Just clip that bit. The autistic population, neurodivergent populations, are just a natural variation of neurodiversity. That's it. And then all of those neurodivergences are within medical model. Mate, why? Why is autism in DSM and ICD? Why is it in a diagnostic manual for mental disorders? Nothing to do with being a mental disorder, nor is it in terms of international classification of diseases. Why have we not got a clinically recognized manual of neurodivergences that is either neuroaffirmative or neuroneutral, like just honest, where we can have things like, going back to autistic burnout, definitions of autistic burnout, and they can be defined properly, autistic-led, defined properly, but not in a negative, pejorative manner. Why can't we do that? It seems nonsense or nonsensical to me that we haven't done. And I will try and get a bit more positive, but in terms of where we are now, so ethnocentricity. Oh, God, I've even gone down the etymology route there in terms of ethos and centricity. Anyway, don't need to worry about that. But basically, you'll know all this. But very quickly, ethnocentricity is that idea that there are populations, cultures, whatever groups where you're the one in the right, basically. And we know this. Well, there's examples of ethnocentricity going on right now, let alone historically, but you'll all be able to think of concepts of ethnocentricity. You've got religious ethnocentricity. Our religion is the right one. If you don't have that religion, you need to drop yours and join ours because we're the right way of doing it and you're the wrong way of doing it. And from that came the pathology paradigm, certainly within the idea of neurodivergence. And neuronormativity is basically the neuro component of ethnocentricity. So neuronormativity is basically saying, it follows the pathology paradigm that says basically there's a good way of processing information, neurological processing, and if you differ from that, i.e. if you are neurodivergent, then you are somehow less, and you're the one that needs change, you're the one that needs fixing, you're the one that needs to join in with everybody else, and until that, we are going to look down on you. That's basically what neuronormativity is. And then you've got the incredible neurodiversity paradigm, which is basically saying, now hang on a minute, there's Nothing wrong with being neurodivergent. Going back to like being neurodivergent is just part of neurodiversity. That's what it is. It's very real. Being neurodivergent, just as real as anything else, but it shouldn't be segregated as somehow you are. Just because you're a minority group doesn't make you a lesser human being. At the moment, at this moment in time, and again, I'm talking specifically about autism, but I'm pretty sure you could relate this to all types of neurodivergences, of which there are many. By being labelled as autistic, you are seen by society as being lesser. And if you again, it doesn't take much to look at autism. Going back to what I was talking about in terms of epistemology, just looking up some of the theories in terms of you have to have a deficit in this, and of course, famously, there are some that essentially are saying you are this particular, if you like, skill is what makes people human, and autistic people lack that. So that literally saying being autistic is somehow being less than human, which is just A, vile, but B, it's just not true. Like it's just not true. So see, going back to epistemology, we should be challenging these things. Now, by the way, I ought to have qualified. I'm not. By the way, if you see me keep looking up there, it's 'cause that's where my clock is. I'm not sort of ignoring you lot. Anyway, you're probably not that bothered. Where was I? Oh yes, I'm not acknowledging, or I should acknowledge that being neurodivergent is often, not invariable, but often incredibly disadvantageous. It's not easy, right? And it's not easy because the world is not made up for you. It's not easy because you're neurodivergent. And I absolutely, genuinely believe that. And sometimes parents say, well, you clearly don't know what it's like. I don't know how these people know my background, but anyway, my child has a really difficult time. And I go, that's not because of the nature of your child. It's because society is not supporting your child or you or whatever in the way that suits that child. You can't treat autism in isolation and make the erroneous assumption that being autistic or being neurodivergent is inherently bad. It's just categorically not true. And then this concept of microaggressions and being exposed to these sorts of things on a day-to-day basis is part of, I believe, why autistic people have long-term trauma, why there is such a high risk of autistic burnout, suicidality, suicidal ideation, being in prison, and all the negative things that we know that living as a neurodivergent person, you're more at risk of being exposed to. And it's not because you're neurodivergent. I'll come back to that in a bit, but this is part of it, and it's quite an insidious and invidious component. That's why I like shouting about it to anybody that will listen. That's why it blew me away when David first contacted me and said, we're going to allow you to talk about this stuff, because I think it's so important. And it's also so easy, I think, to change. It doesn't cost anything to go through whatever narrative you have in your school or in your clinic or in your therapy room or whatever and go, we're going to completely change the narrative to be neuro-affirming. Or if we're not allowed to be because we have to abide by DSM because we are clinicians, but we can also have a paragraph going, despite the fact that I have to abide by this set of criteria, our belief is that being autistic is a natural variation of neurodiversity. We do not buy into the medical model. Like that makes such a difference to the experience of being neurodivergent in terms of trusting in the system. Anyway, that's a different presentation altogether. I might be able to come back to that in the Q&A if possible. Anyway, back in the 70s, Chester Pierce said, black-white racial interactions are characterized by white put-downs done in an automatic pre-conscious or unconscious fashion. Basically, what he was saying in a nutshell is the way white Americans are talking about black Americans is essentially offensive and could be considered microaggressions. And obviously, you wouldn't, that doesn't exist to the same extent as it does today. And if you're a public figure, you would be cancelled overnight if you used racist language, for example. I honestly think, and this breaks my heart, in the same way that if you use that sort of language today in this context here, the original context in terms of race, if you take the word race away and put the word neurodivergent or autism in instead, that is what we do today. Like literally, not we again, but that is so commonly the narrative. Just Google what is autism. and count in the first ones that comes up, that count how many have medical model deficit-based language. And nobody's going, hang on a minute, this should be unlawful. This is microaggressions against the population of whom you're writing about. And nobody seems bothered. Like, why? Like, and it's so easy to do something about it. and I like those feelings of lesser perpetuate. If you grow up, like, autism is still in education seen as a slur. So you're an idiot, you're autistic. We have lyrics in pop songs that say these things. That so often in terms of the narrative you see in the media and so on and so forth, have these hints, if you like, or microaggressions that again, I don't think it's done in a negative. It's not. Some of them are obviously purposeful, but mostly they're not deliberate. It's just that is the narrative. That's what people think. That's just how people have raised. I know so many individuals who are like, oh, my child refuses to accept they're autistic. They don't want to be autistic. And I always say, look, I don't think it's that they don't want to be autistic, but that what they don't want is to be what they believe autism is, because autism is seen as such a negative, stigmatizing thing. And this leads to gaslighting. And I don't want to trigger anybody here. I sometimes try and make light of this, but like, it's like when oh God, it's like it is humorous because it is so ridiculous. I think I'm so tempted to look at the chat because there seems to be loads going. Mind you might all be going, "Oh, this person's talking complete rubbish," in which case I'll just cry. But anyway, so when somebody goes, "Oh, are you sure so and so's autistic?" They don't look autistic, and still people still say it to this day. They still say, "Oh, you don't look autistic." So what? And then I've got into the rather naughty habit of saying, "Oh, I know I'm an autism lecturer and I should know these things, but can you just remind me, what does autism look like?" And then everybody goes really, really quiet. And then you sort of can follow up by, or you just leave it. It's like, well, that just demonstrates what a ridiculous thing it is to actually say. If so, you call somebody out and you go, what does autism look like? And they're like, yeah, maybe that is a bit of a daft thing to say. But in terms of gaslighting, like in this sense, gaslighting means having your reality questioned by others. And again, the exposure to having your own reality questioned in terms of being constantly told who you are, who you should be, what you're not, how you compare to others. It's horrible. Not only is it almost unbearably patronizing, because very often the people who are saying these things don't even know you. So it's almost like, well, they're making out they know you better than you know yourself. But they're also so ridiculously wrong. So saying things, and I used to, Joe very kindly mentioned my course, the course I teach on. And I used to take I didn't used to teach it. I was like, oh, nobody does. I put it back into the content because people are still saying to me, oh, yeah, I was told I can't be autistic. I had one literally a few weeks ago. A young lady said, oh, yeah, I failed my autism assessment because I took my boyfriend with me. And the assessor said, well, you can't be autistic because you have very good eye contact with your boyfriend. Like, this was a few weeks ago, right? And it's like, how? Trust me, I do know this. You don't know where somebody's looking. You don't know where somebody's eyeballs are looking unless you've got eye tracking to detect the sensors on them, which is highly unlikely in an autism assessment. And she said the irony being, I never look at my boyfriend's eyes anyway. I just look at his nose, and it just appears that I'm making eye contact. But that's gaslighting. That's basically saying you cannot be who you think you are because I've decided. You've got Fred, like where's this nonsense, like what, the sociability thing, like this absolute myth that autistic people are unsociable. Like, where's the evidence? Literally, where's the evidence to show that autistic people are non-sociable? Like, actually, going back to, I haven't done the critique yet of those three autistic spectrum disorder. Like, I can't. I mean, I have issues with all three of those words. Autism itself coming from the Greek autos, followed by ism in terms of self and that sense of self and that egocentric. That right from the outset, people were talking about autistic individuals as those egocentric, inward looking. I don't think it's true at all. I think most autistic people are very outward looking. But also this myth that autistic people are loners and they don't like other humans and I don't know where the evidence is for this. There are certainly some individuals who genuinely don't like, very non-sociable for most other people. I'd put myself into that. I don't like people particularly. I really, 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 really like a very small number of individuals. But then I think that the whole of the population will be on a scale of sociability. Some individuals who are autistic will love being sociable. There are some of the what I call the predominant neurotype who hate sociable events and everything in between. So sociability, sociality on the other hand, is a completely different thing. I think there's something to be said about the autistic sociality and what people, autistic people, regard as their own sociality and their values and so on and so forth. I think that's very, very different, and that's absolutely fine. And but shouldn't be recognised as bad. I just talking about friends. Actually, I'm going off at a little bit of a tangent, but I was talking about this since I was on a podcast, and somebody asked me, there is a reason why I'm saying this, because I think it's quite life affirmative, and it might be useful to you. I don't know. You'd probably come to this conclusion yourself anyway, but it took me quite a long time. And they said, what was a life-changing event for you in this podcast? Like, name something that was completely life-altering. I was like, oh god, it's a difficult question that. And I came up with. I was quite pleased with the answer in a sense. I said I remember I was 12 years old, and there was somebody, well, my mum, I'm sure she won't listen to this. And even if she did, I'm sure she won't mind. But for all of my childhood, much of my childhood, my mum was worried about me because I didn't have any friends. And she kept saying, oh, Luke, you need to make friends. You need to be better at making friends. Or, you're not going to be happy and do all these sorts of things. And very well meaning. I'm sure she genuinely thought, you can't be happy just sat in the corner reading for every waking minute. Surely that can't make a person happy. It makes me very, very happy. And it's still what I do to this day. I certainly do go out of my way to try and find friends, strange things that they are. It was 12 when I realised that this person, massively in authority, might be wrong. And that was what was so affirmative for me, to realise, even at that relatively young age, that just because most other people do things in this particular way, that doesn't automatically make it applicable to the individual. And it's okay to go against that grain if it suits you, and if it's not immoral or unethical or whatever. If it's within moral boundaries and being a good person, it's okay, for example, to go, actually, I'm not interested in friends, thank you very much, and you don't need to worry about me. I am very, very happy reading on my own. Like, my Kindle to me is way more important than having a friend. Like, so, but apart from the people that I am close to, like my wife, and my two boys. So that's, I think that's, for me anyway, that was incredibly, incredibly important. You're married. What, like, you can't be autistic because you're married, or you can't have, like, this always makes me, you can't be autistic because you've got children. Where do you think they're coming from? God, it's like, it's utterly bizarre things. Imaginative, that's another one. But again, that is still a myth that's perpetuated today, isn't it? Autistic people lack imagination. Where that ever came from is just beyond me. But this other side is, it isn't that bad, or you don't look that, you must only be very mild. How offensive is that? That somehow you've got to be severely broken in order to be autistic. Again, that's not just gaslighting, it's a microaggression, it's a double whammy. And I think people say it because they're trying to be kind. They come from a well-meaning place. But again, the underlying supposition is to be autistic must be awful. Therefore, I'll just say to you, oh, well, I think you must only be very mild because I don't think you are awful. But actually, that's incredibly insidious. And then when people say, like, that really annoys me. I think in one of my anxiety books, I've got a bit at the end saying things to never say to somebody who's so David mentioned I did a talk on anxiety. I'm quite obsessed with anxiety, but things not to say to an anxious person. Oh, you don't need to be anxious about that. It's like, oh, great, I've been anxious about that all my life, but you telling me I don't need to be anxious. Oh, you've cured me. Well done. Thank you very much. What absolute nonsense. As opposed to buying into your own authenticity, which is gorgeous. When somebody goes, do you know what? that wouldn't make me anxious, and I've never met somebody for whom that causes anxiety, but I absolutely accept that you're anxious. I find that really interesting. Is there anything we can do about it? Maybe there isn't, but even accepting your authenticity is a huge step forward, a huge step. I'm gonna, if I have time, we'll be talking about autistic courtesy later on, because that's something else that I've started thinking about recently. And also, just to keep you engaged. I don't know if you might not be engaged at all, but stay with me today, because I'll be introducing a brand new neologism, a made-up word. So you've got that to look forward to. If you like language as much as me, you can look forward to that. Oh, so masking and Wittgenstein's line. So I was really interested in talking about autistic burnout. Oh, one more person does something in the chat, and it'll be up to 45, and 4 + 5 is 9, which is 3 threes. So I shall look forward to that. Anyway, so is there such thing as autistic masking? So if I'm doing teaching like about autism, hey, so 45, right? Nobody ask any more questions unless we can get it up to 99. Anyway, sorry, where was I? Yes. Oh no, I'm just thinking about my 9th book proposal. If it doesn't get accepted, I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got to do 9. Anyway, sorry. It was a big leap to go from 6 to 7, because I was like, oh, I've got to write another 3 now. Anyway, so very often the response when you talk about masking, and this definitely isn't just autistic masking, this neurodivergent masking as well. So many people go, oh yeah, well, everybody masks a bit. We mask all the time, and da, da, da. And these are the 3 questions that I pose. I go, look. And this is part of Wittgenstein's line. So we collectively are using the term masking, word actually, but or the term autistic masking, and masking itself as the same word. It's literally the same word. So you've got the autistic person going, oh yeah, this is masking, and then you've got the predominant neurotype person also saying, oh yeah, but I mask as well, right? My suggestion is that we're falling afoul of Wittgenstein's line concept, saying, look, if a line dropped into this, what are we on Zoom, dropped into Zoom and started engaging with us, talking English, and forgive me if English isn't your first language, but it's mine, and started chatting to me, we would not understand each other. So we're using the same words, we're using the same language, but we wouldn't understand each other because our life experiences of lionness and Lukeness are so disparate. There's such little overlap that we can't comprehend each other's experiences, and therefore their meaning, their life worlds. And I think there's something, and I'm not saying it's as binary and as black as white as that, but there is something to be said to buying into the concept of neurodivergent Wittgenstein's line. I really do. So that's why, like, say, for example, I'm talking about autistic anxiety, say, look, it isn't the same, generally speaking, as non-autistic anxiety. They're different concepts. They're actually different things. Masking is a different thing. Same word, different thing. I always go back to particularly teachers who say, well, we mask at work, and go, are you conscious when you're doing it? Are you proactively thinking of masking as you're doing it? As you're doing it, does it take an enormous amount of energy, a huge amount of effort? And as a result, are you exhausted once you come away from that environment? Do you then need to lie down for 2 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks? And so often the answer is no, no, and no, at which point I can say, I don't think you're experiencing masking in the same way then. I think when most of the predominant neurotype anyway say that they mask, what they mean is they very subtly, subconsciously slide into a slightly different character based on the environment that they're in. And they don't even have to think about it. It doesn't cause them any stress whatsoever, doesn't take any effort, and they're not knackered as a result. And that is not what autistic people and other neurodivergent people say when they refer to the experiences of masking. And you'll know that. And I think that increasingly I hope anyway, there's an awareness of the older population, and this is crucial in term, and again, just be kind to yourself, but I'm increasingly coming across older autistics who have masked all their lives, and maybe had a really good relationship, so their trusted person is there, maybe they're in a job that fits their persona, and all of a sudden they retire or their partner dies, or whatever, and all of a sudden they are engaging with psychiatric services for the first time in their lives, and the accusation is, oh, you're having some kind of breakdown, it's psychosis. And I think, well, I know for a fact for some of those, this is a massive autistic meltdown that's decades in the making. This isn't a psychiatric psychosis episode. It looks like it is, but it's not. This is an unidentified autistic person who have had their support pillars in place throughout their lives, and all of a sudden that's changed. Like retirement, for example. And society goes, retirement's brilliant, you should look forward to it. The autistic, and this isn't everybody by any stretch, I have seen it, so it is very real. The autistic person, oh right, I'll retire now. Oh my God, what my routine's completely gone. My job is what I stood for, etc., etc., etc. So I think that whole concept of Wittgenstein's line is really, really important. So yes, going back to epistemology, what should we believe? Let me just move these people out the way, put you over there. Right, there we go. So statement number one, he ran out of the classroom. Okay. Statement number two, he ran out of the classroom in all probability as a result of the loud bang when the cabinet fell over. Which statement sounds more believable? And the answer, you can answer that yourself. It's entirely up to you. I believe that most people suggest that statement number two sounds more believable. The reality is, in terms of statistical mathematical probability, that statement number two is impossible to be more likely than statement number one. It's impossible. It's you can prove it without a shadow of doubt. The reality is, the one thing that we absolutely categorically know is that he ran out of the classroom. So statement number one is statement A, and that's categorically true. Statement number two is A plus B plus C, actually, in all probability as a result of the loud bang when the cabinet fell over. Now, we don't know that it was as a result. So statement number two is A, which is definite yes, plus B, which is question markable. And yet people so often opt for statement two without realizing it, because it just sounds better. And that really worries me in the neurodivergent field, because there's too many narratives about, oh, that sounds really plausible. We've got to start testing what people actually mean, just because they sound believable. And this is another one. So this is a real thing, regression towards me. Giving praise leads to poor performance, shouting at students leads to better performance. This is a real case study, actually, about it was actually a mathematical economist, but it really reminded me of the very first blog post I put about good behavior at school, not so good at home. So this was a guy, like he was doing some teaching he was doing some work with aviators who were in charge of teaching people how to fly airplanes, in particular taking off and landing. And this guy was saying, look, you shouldn't shout at your students, basically. You know, it's not a very kind thing to do. You know, and what the group of students said was, no, actually, if we shout at our students, it does have an impact, and there's a direct correlation. In the same way that actually when we tell them that's really, really good, it doesn't work, because this guy was saying, look, being very negative about people's performances isn't helpful. Being really positive about good performances is a good thing. And they said, no, it's the opposite. So they gave real life, they all had the same examples. They said, look, so-and-so did a landing. It was a rubbish landing, absolutely rubbish. And so we shouted at them and said, oh, it's absolutely rubbish landing. And the next time they landed, it was much better. And conversely, when they did a really good landing, oh, that was amazing landing, absolutely outstanding. The next time they landed, it wasn't as good. And what this guy was, this is strange, I can't work this out, because I know for a fact that I actually just shouted that was horrible. And then he came up with this concept of regression towards mean. So, but obviously, if you're a 7 out of 10 most times, and then all of a sudden you're a 10 out of 10, the likelihood is the next time you're going to be back to a 7 out of 10. In the same way, if you're a 7 out of 10 and you do rubbish landings and you're 2 out of 10, the next time it's a regression towards the mean. You're going to go back to what is your average over and over again. And it's that correlation between A plus B doesn't always equal C. And this good behavior at school, not so good at home, was, I wrote that years and years ago. It doesn't matter why I wrote it, but so many parents are saying school doesn't believe me when I tell them that my child is really struggling at school, because the behavioral side of things, the children having meltdowns not at school but at home, and they don't believe there's a link between the two. And actually, it's far too simple to say, oh no, the child's having a meltdown at home, therefore the problem is at home, as opposed to understanding, no, the problem is at school, and they're just building, and it's only when in their safe space at home that they're able to display these or have a meltdown. By the way, oh no, I can't say this on record. You'll have to ask me when we stop recording. I wrote about it. I don't think it made it into a book. I think my publisher said, oh, that's too gross. Anyway, so yes, I won't say that. I'll tease you with that. And then problems of narrative. Oh yeah, the speed of exponential. You know all about Villala, the guy who invented chess, and then the Sultan that he invented the game for. So the Sultan was like, I want to give you a reward. So he said, okay, what I would like you to do is have 1 grain of wheat, and I think it was wheat per chessboard for the first square on the chessboard, and then double it to the next one, then double it to the next one, and double it to the next one. And then when you get to 64, presumably 64, then that will be my reward. And the soldier was like, well, that's pathetic, that's rubbish. Well, he didn't realize, there's this concept of the speed of exponential growth, that by the end of the chessboard it'd be the size of a small mountain. It's actually an incredible gift. Now, the reason I point that out in terms of the narrative is that so often autistic children and adults, actually, I think, and you can correct me if you don't think this is the case, not just autistic or neurodivergent, they are judged on the last thing that has what perceived to have triggered them. And people go, oh God, yeah, they had a meltdown because of that. What about all the things that led up to that? It's like when people go, oh, I went out last night, oh, I got really drunk, I was violently ill. It was just that last whiskey. Yeah. What about the 9 pints you had before that? Might that have had something to do with it? If you'd have missed out all of those and just had a whiskey, you'd have been all right. Whereas people then go away thinking metaphorically, going, right, we need to avoid whiskey and then we'll be okay. And that isn't the case. The other thing, just quickly, because this really does, it drives me. When people are expected to engage in the same way day after day after day, just based on the observation that you were okay yesterday. Like, that is an awful, awful assumption to make. And it came to me, like, I was out, I would never in a million years claim to be a triathlete, but I am somebody who does triathlons just very badly. So I'm not an athlete, but I do like doing triathlons. And the longer, the better. And I was out running and I was thinking about, I won't bore you with which, anyway, it was a long race, right? Yeah. And I was thinking, like, I won't be able to move tomorrow. Like I've been out on the road or in the water and down the road collectively for like 15 and a half hours. So tomorrow I'm not going to be able to. And it suddenly occurred to me, like if I said to somebody, oh yeah, yesterday on a Saturday I did an Ironman triathlon and I'm laid on the couch. They're not going to go, well, why don't you do another one today? Well, I assume they wouldn't anyway. They'd absolutely appreciate that I was physically knackered. Why don't we afford that same courtesy towards autistic children? Because so often the narrative is they go to school on Monday, oh, they were all right yesterday. So on a Tuesday, we expect the same performance, as opposed to realizing that Monday has wiped them out. And that's it for the rest of the week. That's just an example. Or, you know, you're okay for the first hour of going to that party. You should be okay for the rest of it. It's like, no, 1 hour and that's it. I've lost my spoons then. I can't, I need to get out of it. And we just don't do it. We do it for physical activity or physical energy. We don't do it for mental energy, social energy, sensory energy, communication energy, all of those things. And I've written about this. I've written about the 9 different types of energy and how we can chart them. I don't think I've done it in this presentation because it's a different presentation, but like, I love the fact you just borrow a chapter of one of my books. And you can chart your own energy. Like you can literally have an Excel spreadsheet, another one's presumably available, and literally break it down into those 9 different types of energy and go, okay, well, like say communication energy. Oh, it really, really does take it out of me having to do a presentation at a conference. It doesn't actually, it massively energizes me. But listening to Luke Beardon just kills me off. So if I know I've got to listen to 3/4 of an hour of Luke Beardon, I need to go and lie down for the next hour. You can chart that so the next time somebody weirdly exposes you, you've got to go and listen to Luke Beardon, know, then you've got to take the rest of the evening off. And you can actually we don't chart ourselves in the way that we should do in order to then future plan to make sure that you never run out of spoons. We don't do it on behalf of our loved ones or the people at work or whatever. Why not? Like we know about it in terms of, but we were talking about earlier in the break, know about it in terms of burnout. It's one of the, I think, I mean, I would think it because I invented it, but I think that kind of monitoring of those 9 different types of energy and making sure that we don't replicate situations that have got ourselves into trouble in the future, that is a way of avoiding burnout. Like it just seems like a simple way of avoiding burnout, and we should be doing it. Everybody should be doing it. Okay, right. Oh yes. Oh God, I've got 10 minutes. 10, 11 minutes. So autistic safety, who needs to worry about it? Well, so this is a hypothesis. I don't know this for a fact, but every single individual I've spoken to have been like, yeah. So I think that autistic individuals, again, I would suggest probably the neurodivergent population, of all ages live in a state that does not feel safe much of their lives. And so many individuals don't know that that shouldn't necessarily be the case. And yet you talk to non-autistic people and go, when was the last time you felt unsafe? And many people will be able to, oh yeah, I can tell you that. It was it was 3 weeks ago, you know, and such happened and it made me feel, you know, really quite unsafe. So you remember that because it was so significant to you. Whereas you talk to many neurodivergent people, and I'm apologies if this is you, but often the narrative is, well, as soon as I go out the front door, or whenever I wake up, or whenever somebody phones me from a withheld number, which is a common occurrence. Every time I've got to go and speak to somebody, anytime I have to go and, I don't know, pick up my child and stand in the playground for more than 3 minutes, whatever. It's just an ongoing, constant part of your everyday life. And it shouldn't be. Like, if we can change the narrative, change microaggressions, change understanding, have a better concept of autistic and neurodivergent epistemology, a lot of these things have got nothing to do with the neurodivergent population themselves. Everybody else can go and sort that out, and all of a sudden life will be better for everybody. And I just think it's criminal that we're not doing it. I've come up with things in sense of streets. So utopia is my concept of autistic utopia. Right? So autism plus environment equals outcome. And again, you can change autism to neurodivergent here. Being autistic, you know, I got into so much trouble. I wrote something that ended up in the media. And basically, a synopsis or précis of what I was trying to say is, if somebody tells you that they are autistic, you know nothing about them apart from the fact that they're autistic. That's all you know. I suppose you also know that they were born autistic and that they will die autistic. So you know 3 things. 1, they're autistic. 2, they were born autistic. 3, that they will die. You don't know anything else about them whatsoever. And I wrote this to try and get people to stop making assumptions just based on the identifying label, because we don't. Like, and this was decades ago. And parents, particularly of autistic people, said, you clearly don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 blah. And I was just trying to get across this concept that being autistic in and of itself doesn't mean anything apart from you're autistic. And yet we know that there are often trends in terms of outcomes. So going back to what David was saying earlier about anxiety, autism plus environment often leads to anxiety, not always. And if it's not always the case, then we categorically cannot say autistic people are anxious, because they're not. They're at much higher risk statistically of being anxious, but autism does not equate to anxiety in and of itself, which is why when people are referred to CAMS and CAMS go, well, that's just part of being autistic, that is disgusting. Absolutely, categorically, as far as I can tell, unlawful discrimination. It just say, well, you're autistic, therefore you will be anxious. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. Otherwise, every single autistic person would be anxious, and they are not. But loads and loads and loads of autistic people are. So why is that the case? If you believe in that very simple equation, autism plus environment equals outcome, and I believe it because I wrote it, but I genuinely believe it. And we also know that you cannot change being autistic, and why would you want to? Nor can you change being neurodivergent. You can't force a person, oh God, snap out of it and start being more like everybody else. You can't do it. It's like literally neurologically impossible. Then the only thing left to change, if we want to change the outcome, is the environment. And yet, far too often, it's, no, we need to change the person. It's just completely the wrong way of going about it. Or it's seen as a good thing. You go into school and say, oh yeah, your child's doing really well. They've got loads of coping mechanisms. So they're doing really. If you need to have coping mechanisms, then something's still going wrong. Why are you not acknowledging that by saying that, as if that's a good thing, we should need to have coping mechanisms? There's something going wrong in order for that child to have coping mechanisms. Anyway, PNT based, so predominant neurotype based concept. By the way, the predominant neurotype could be ADHD. If you live in a family full of ADHDers, then your predominant neurotype in your family home is ADHD. But in the main, in terms of global society, the predominant neurotype are non-neurodivergent individuals, because neurodivergencies are statistically in the minority. So it's just a statistical demographic, as opposed to neurotypical, which has those connotations of neurotypical or typicality, normality, abnormality, which I worry a little bit about. Anyway, PNT-based concepts need to be translated before they apply to the either autistic or neurodivergent person. So basically, everything society does, we need to think about it in terms of, does this apply in the same way to my neurodivergent employee? We've got to think about it, and it's a massive job. But I would argue if we're not doing that, that increases risk of discrimination. And then the golden notion, the amount of energy put into affecting change needs to warrant the intended outcome. And so many autistic people that I know have real problems with this. If something is wrong, it needs to be fixed. If society is wrong, they need to know. If my kid's TA doesn't understand my child, they need to accept that they're idiots, or whatever it might. I'm just paraphrasing. But actually, the amount of energy you put into trying to fix things, and I don't mean fixing the child, I mean fix injustice or whatever, needs to warrant the intended outcome. The reason I the first time I came up with this was actually around a young person. I was doing some consultancy in school, and the school had spent like 2 terms trying to force this young autistic man into assembly. And they spent so much time and effort of forcing this kid into assembly. And then they finally got him into assembly, and he was really distressed, and he had his big earphones on and his rocket. Like, clearly he got nothing out of it whatsoever. And I said, look, was that worth it? Was that 2 terms worth of work actually worth getting this poor kid into assembly when he gets nothing out of it whatsoever anyway? Choose your battles. I've just expanded on that autism plus environment equals outcome, just in terms of breaking it down. So one of the key components in terms of the environment is one's autistic self or neurodivergent self. And I think this is one of the most exciting, incredible things you will ever be involved in, if you're lucky enough to be involved in, either with yourself or somebody else, is learning about who you are, your own authenticity. That's what my 9th book is all about. Autistic authenticity, and understanding and beginning to love your own or the autistic authentic self. So actually understanding the different lens that you might see a person. I tend to give the same example, so apologies if people heard me say this before, but this is like, I think I've written about this, I can't remember, but I love the concept of the autistic lens or the neurodivergent lens, understanding a particular context, but in very different ways. And this was a parent, it does have a happy ending, by the way, but a mum saying, I don't understand why my child doesn't love me. I don't understand why she doesn't show me affection. Like, my son is always hugging me and telling me he loves me. I don't understand why my daughter isn't bothered. And then you've got the child's voice saying, I don't understand why mummy doesn't realise that when I stand that close to her and put my head that close to her shoulder, that I would never do that to anybody else in the world. That's how much I love her. And it just gets me every time that if we judge a neurodivergent individual through a non-neurodivergent lens, we will get it wrong. I genuinely think that. So understanding one's authenticity or your child's authenticity is huge. And then obviously everybody else, sensory society, and so on and so forth. Yes, I told you I'd come up with a neologism, scrupulosity. So scrupulosity is a made-up word. I made it up. It is in a book that's been written that hasn't been published yet, and it's based on the concept of scrupulosity, which is essentially religious guilt. So people just feeling inherently guilty but unjustifiably, like they don't need it. Now, I think scrupulosity is autistic guilt, and every time I've mentioned this to audiences of autistic people, they're like, oh my God, like that feeling that whatever's gone wrong, it's my fault. And that constant, oh, sorry, no. And I think that comes from a lifetime of microaggressions, of being told that's a stupid thing to ask. don't do it like that. You need to be more like, so always feeling that you are actually in the wrong, which is why understanding your own authenticity is so important in terms of going, no, I'm not in the wrong. It went wrong, but that wasn't my fault. And trying to grow generations of human beings who never have to suffer from scrupulosity. And then the concept of autistic courtesy. Sorry, I know I'm running out of time, but so again, I absolutely love this. And again, talking to the very embryonic thing that I've been thinking about, but again, so many people that I've talked to have been like, oh my goodness, that's never occurred to me. And some of it, I'm very conscious that at least one of my students is here, but like for my new, so say for example, I was just writing some stuff yesterday for a new cohort of students, and I was reading it, I was like, oh yeah, and I've got a section saying it is in person. You're not expected to attend. If it's too anxiety inducing for you to attend, then we'll arrange something else. If you do want to attend, rest assured there'll be no icebreakers, no group work. You won't be expected to ask questions in front of anybody else if that makes you feel uncomfortable. You can ask questions. You can email me directly and I'll check my emails. So there's all these other alternatives before I've even met my students, many of whom will be neurodivergent. And on doing that, so many people have got back in contact with me saying, nobody's ever done that for me before. Nobody, ever. And my students are mostly mature students. And so I've come up with this idea of autistic courtesy. You can't say this is good practice for all autistic people, but acknowledging that being neurodivergent might mean that you might need to do things slightly differently. Even that level of courtesy can lead to feelings of safety. Going back to that concept of autistic safety, actually, I might be in safer hands here than I ordinarily feel. And I think to me, that's absolutely gorgeous. And you will know it. I can almost guarantee there'll be people listening to this going, yeah, I've never encountered neurodivergent courtesy ever. And that breaks my heart. And actually, the predominant neurotype, like, what are you on about? Like, because life for most of the non-autistic or non-neurodivergent populations, things are there laid on the plate anyway, and it's not a us or them thing in any way, straight imagination. And then zero tolerance for apologizing for one's own self. So like going back to burnout, I'm in a group, and this is not my idea. I wish it was, because it's absolutely brilliant. But this group, I think I said something. I said I wasn't able to do that because I was and someone said, no, in this group you're not allowed to apologize for your disability. That's who you are. You can explain that this is the reason why. You're not allowed to say sorry for who you are. I just burst into tears. I was like, that's wicked in a good way. That's amazing. And then risk-free spaces. And this was, I won't go into this actually, certainly not at the end of the presentation, but it was a group of very, very, very vulnerable individuals who were able to talk about things that they in the group said, we've never been able to say this to anybody else, certainly not in therapy. Why is this case? And then we came up with this concept that this is a risk-free space. Nobody in this space is going to think negatively in any way, shape or form about you discussing or disclosing these things. And quite astonishingly, I'm almost exactly to time. I think I should have said, yeah, oh God, that's terrible. I think I was asked to speak for an hour, and then there's supposed to be like half an hour for Q&A or discussion or whatever.
So I wonder whether when I was presenting about a relational way of supporting autistic young people, I was trying to convey, I suppose, the significance of autism being a relational experience, and therefore therapy needing to take a relational approach. And that fits perfectly, like you said, David, with Luke's equation, which I have ingrained in my head already. And I guess I'm not wanting to put Luke on the spot, because you're not a therapist, absolutely, and it is our place to advocate, but we need to advocate with people who can have influence to support autistic people to be helped in a way that's helpful, and to stop this pattern of therapy being invalidating and re-traumatizing and leading autistic people to feel more and more helpless and more broken. So I guess that's why I'm so passionate about systemic, and I ask these questions. Like I said in the chat, I know you know Kieran, and I've had this conversation, and he's very excited to talk together about what this means for autistic people and how this is really quite a different approach to therapy, to the individual, focus on the person, which can be quite invalidating of an autistic
100%.
experience.
I would say, yeah. I'm guessing massively overestimating the fact that anybody would listen to me, but I 100% need educating. Like, I love being educated. Like, it's frustrating. Yeah, well, anyway, I was going to say something that sounded horribly arrogant, but no, I love learning new things, particularly things that I can then share that might then influence better practice within the neurodivergent field. I love it.
So I just welcome these conversations, really, that we can all like be working together to learn how to use systemic to be supportive and helpful and positive, and we can learn how systemic is different from other therapeutic approaches, because that is something really common. Young people come into me who have had previous experiences. We have to work through all that first. They're traumatized by their previous experiences with people like me in their minds, and I have to wade through, but I'm not like them. I'm not like those people that you've worked with before, and that's just a lack of understanding. Those people are well-meaning. They're all in it for the same reasons. They want to do good. We have to learn better. We have to learn to do better. I mean, we as in therapists. So yeah, I will be quiet now, but
Don't be. No, I think you're
thank you for
absolutely
asking the
spot on,
question.
Tracy. No, I genuinely think you're absolutely spot on. And actually, I don't want to be overly negative, but I worry about these are the individuals who've landed on your door. What about all of those individuals who have gone through the system and it's broken them even more, and then they've just given up in terms of, okay, well, I can't ever get anything positive out of therapy, so I'll just have to deal with stuff on my own. And yeah,
And there's lots of them.
yeah, I think so.
Unless anyone else wants to do it, I have an idea about writing a paper for Murmurations, provisionally entitled something like Luke Beardon for Systemic Psychotherapists, just to contextualize what Luke says within our practice. I don't know if other people have got that idea, but I'd be very interested in writing such a thing.
Do pop your email in the chat, David, to lead the paper.
He's on record now. He said it.
Yeah, I said it. Yeah.
And please take me off spotlight. I feel very uncomfortable.
And Jess has her hand up.
Put me on spotlight now, Gail. Hi, I'm Jess. I just wanted to kind of jump in a little bit with this conversation. I had a few things and I might have lost a couple of them now, but maybe they'll come as I start talking. But I was sort of thinking about where all of this kind of could start from, or sort of the process in terms of pairing autistic therapists and people who are autistic and coming to therapy, and that sort of pairing, and then where we're kind of standing as autistic systemic therapists, and then thinking about what is kind of needed in so much of this process, and thinking about the training that we're actually receiving as systemic therapists on both the foundation intermediate course, but also on the qualifying course. And I'm really interested about autistic individuals' experience of what it's like to train on that qualifying course as an autistic person, and how much we feel like we're being sort of taught and equipped as autistic individuals to then work with autistic individuals. And so I'm sort of thinking, where in the process does a change need to occur, and sort of thinking a little bit back even more than I think perhaps what has been sort of being said in this conversation, and just wondering about what things might need to change or be implemented in terms of that training, and then thinking, Luke, of what, you know, your area of expertise kind of is, and sort of, you know, joining that somehow. And then David, you sort of very nicely kind of paired both of those things together by suggesting writing an article about it. But it was very much along the lines of sort of what I was thinking, what I'm really interested in. So I just thought that I would comment.
Amazing. Like, knowledge is power, isn't it? It goes right back to the concept of epistemology. Knowledge is power, but that could be incredibly powerless if it's inappropriate knowledge, if that makes sense. So I think like breaking down all of those myths and recognizing that what is perpetuated as valid epistemology actually needs breaking down, and actually that when you do meet that new autistic person, everything you know about autism can go out the window and you can start all over again with that human. But there's all sorts of things you need to take into account, bear in mind, presumably as a therapist, in order to. So he concepts things like autistic safety, autistic trust, and autistic courtesy, or neurodivergent. You can replace autism with neurodivergent in all of those. I think they do hold up to scrutiny. I don't see why they wouldn't do, just logically.
Yeah.
And then what that means. Like I remember, was I trying to do a PhD? I was trying to do something about autistic well-being, and I love the concept of autistic well-being, but what is it? Like it's so individual. Like you can't say that there is such a thing as autistic well-being without knowing the autistic person that you're engaging with. So like it's, and I think there's probably parallels with therapy as well. It's like, what's good autism therapy? Well, it depends on who the autistic person is sat in front of you or next to you or on Zoom or, you know, at the other end of the world or whatever it might be. But the more we recognize things like autistic courtesy. So like I was examining a student, PhD student, and the university was like, right, what, Luke, you're the external examiner. What time would you like the viva to be? I was like, well, ask the student. The student's mental energy is going to change throughout the day. We know it's highly likely that they will have good point parts during the day where they'll be able to be more effective at their viva. And the university was like, we never thought of that. I was like, okay, well, that should be standard practice. Like that shouldn't even be a thing. It should just be obvious. Same in terms of therapeutic approaches. You know, it should be standardized that, you know, before you've met the individual, they've done a, I don't know, provided a sensory profile, and you've done a sensory audit, and you've done a communication audit, and you've done a, like, what words are likely to be more triggering, or what areas, all of that before you've even met the person, to develop those relationships of trust and safety, which then allows an individual to be prepared to engage in a relationship that might work. That's before you even start, I think.
But I wonder if some of that, sorry, I'm jumping again. I wonder if some of that is coming from the fact that those practices and ways of doing things and implementing and checking, you know, what is needed, they're not autistic led. You know, they're not led by or developed by or kind of come up with by somebody who is autistic and therefore thinks in that way, experiences things in that way. And actually that's where we need more of us in the system to be able to then say, well, this is what is needed and this is how things could be better and could be made safer.
And I also, you know, there's something to be said about, it's like really interesting what you were saying, Jess. It's like there are plenty of people, I know there are plenty of people, because I have therapists who come on my course, for example, who are only on the course when they realize that they are actually autistic. So you might have a whole bunch of like untapped resources out there because they don't know themselves, which always fascinates me. And many of whom say, well, I just seem to have lots of neurodivergent clients. It's like, yeah, wonder why that might be.
Thanks so much.
Tracy's got a virtual hand up, I know that.
I have. I just quickly wanted to add on to that conversation about the potential or the challenges for systemic training. But fundamental theory is the social graces and holding in mind. So that's, sorry, Luke, I don't know if this is really obvious to you, but social graces is an acronym for all the differences and something else. So it's an open-ended way of holding in mind all difference neutrally to try and take a neutral position. Please jump in, other people, if I'm not explaining it well, but is very important in systemic training. And it's a real challenge to hold that in mind. And on our training course, I only qualified last year, we had huge conversations around race in the context of this. And the conversations are so similar in lots of ways. And hearing the unspoken stories of people on my course of different skin colours and having my eyes opened, and we actually wrote about this in the current context, trying to explore race gently and carefully as a group of women training together of all different skin colours. And it takes me back to my daughter saying, you know, she is autistic. I wish I was a different skin color, because then at least I could make sense of why people treat me the way that they do. And now that's a horrible statement about the difference of skin color, but it also connects with this. One of the other elements of the graces is, this is John Burnham's, that he talks about what's visible and what's invisible, and brings that into the therapy room. What do we talk about? What do we not talk about? What isn't even in our awareness? And so I think it's these layers of exploring difference that really kind of give systemic such potential. We don't always do it right by any means, and certainly training courses struggle with it. I think it was Jess, that point's really important. How do we support neurodivergent students? And that covers all kinds of experiences, but there's potential. The theoretical basis is there. It underpins everything that we're taught and trained. So yeah, I guess that's again my sort of passion for systemic and trying to do things right and trying to get this different ideas, therapeutic approaches kind of out there, as laying a good foundation for this sort of work.
I wonder
I'm
whether
really
it's
well
something
shut
that's
up.
incredibly intangible around culture. Like I'm fascinated with the notion of inclusion. I get asked to do sessions on inclusion, say at the university. I say, look, I can tell you what I do that I would regard as inclusive practice. You could go and do that. That doesn't make your course inclusive, but there is such a thing as inclusive culture, which is more likely before you even know who's with. So going back to race, like in terms of race courtesy. So I was doesn't matter, but I was engaging with the DfE the other day about the national curriculum and how to make it neurodivergent affirmative or neurodivergent friendly. We were talking about race as well, about the fact that there's research to demonstrate that it's very subtle, but like the microaggressions towards, for example, Asian students, because teachers will refuse to say their surname because it's too difficult for them to pronounce, so they'll just use initials instead. And compared to the white Joneses and Smiths, that's very subtle but very clear put down, because culturally people still haven't bought into race culture. Or even like the Olympics. Olympics, somebody did a narrative analysis on commentators' use of words in gymnastics, and for the black gymnasts it was all isn't she strong, and all the whites, isn't she elegant. It's like, again, it's very subtle but culturally completely inappropriate. And I wonder whether, it's completely intangible. I don't know how you like develop that culture of inclusion, but I think longer term that's surely like presumably the way to go. I don't know, but you guys are way more expert than I am, so.
Can I jump in before the break? Oops, sorry, that's Gail speaking. Is that all right?
I don't know if you're asking me. 100%.
No, I think I'm looking at David, but David wouldn't know.
Of course.
That him. I just wanted to jump in and say I don't personally feel qualified as a white person to talk about race in the broader sense of Black and global majority people, But if I speak from my own experience as a Jew, as a lesbian, as a gobby feminist, then I think I would say there are some important distinctions, because between the different groups, and not in a competitive way, but in a temporal way in terms of transgenerational histories. So as a queer person, my people have been persecuted over generations, but I'm not a member of those communities, and the generations are more recent, and the discourses within the recent profession of psychotherapy, psychiatry, and othering, or that, you know, sort of sometimes it stretches as far back as killing the witches. That's the gobby feminist, the different women, the whatever it is. But sometimes, you know, the transgenerational stuff is much more longer term and entrenched and diverse in terms of persecution of Jews over generations, murder, and all the rest of it, moving them on, and then being part of that community. And when I think about, we did a conference on intersectionality, and I think about Black and autistic, we talked about Black and autistic men. And when I think about that, they're much more at risk. And what particularly puts them at risk is their Blackness, because that's what the police will see first. And then also Black trans women are more likely to be murdered than any other group of trans people because they're Black, as well as being trans and women. And I just think it's not about hierarchy, but there are differences. And I just wanted to flag that, because they're not all equivalent. And yeah, they're different in different ways. So just wanting to just trouble that a bit.
Okay, thank you, Gail. Right, thank you very much, Dr. Luke Beardon. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to you again. However, I just want to share with everyone the opening sentence of one of your co-written papers from March this year. It's just a wonderful sentence. And the sentence is, "The beauty of humans is that every single one of us is unique." Dr. Luke Beardon, many thanks for your passionate words of wisdom today.
Thank you.
Let's unmute ourselves and say something so that there's some audibility here, albeit cacophony.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Thank
Really
you.
inspiring. Thank you.